Hi, folks. This interview with Dr. Krister Vasshus is called Dirty Old Norse. So you should expect that there are some naughty words said by him and me. Now, neither one of us is trying to be shocking or, we're not immature about how we say it. He's definitely not immature about it. I occasionally, uh, you know, uh, laugh a little at the humor of it. But we say some bad words out loud. And so if you're sensitive about that, or if you know some people around you are, for instance, kids, you might want to listen to this one privately. All right. Well, from beautiful Colorado, wishing you all the best. We have Dr. Krister Vasshus with us again, and thank you, sir, for joining us today. You have previously been on to discuss some of the fascinating new runic discoveries that were made in 2023. But today we are straying a little bit away from that subject, although I think some runology will come up into the field of dirty Old Norse.
Yeah.
And Patreon was abuzz with questions for you about this. So we can go through some of those. Do you have a ready list of those? Do you want me to pull up a list?
I've you sent me some of the questions, and I remember most of them. And if I forget any, just let me know. I think we'll probably touch upon most of the questions somehow. They're all relevant in some way or another.
All right, perfect. Well, would
Yeah.
you like to start off by giving us kind of a précis of the subject, how you got into it, and what what is there broadly in terms of sources for dirty Old Norse?
Dirty Old Norse when I first started looking into it, the most interesting parts of it I thought was anything connected to sex. So all the details you could find in the sagas, which are usually euphemisms, and sometimes connected to law about marriage, usually. But of course, as well, just the linguistic part of it. Whenever you meet a runic inscription, and some of it's come off as naughty, and in addition to all the words we use for our parts of the body connected to sex. That's really sort of a three ways into it in a way, but the etymology was, I think, the kicking start for me. It's etymology has always been my language coke in a way.
Mhm.
So that's what I started looking into, and explaining why we use the terms we do mostly in Scandinavian modern languages. But eventually you end up in Old Norse and Proto-Germanic somehow. In some cases, even older.
Mhm.
So we will, touch upon some things connected to sex, but most of all the questions that were asked were connected to foul language, you could say, profanity, which is maybe it's one of the mistakes of a Scandinavian, because swearing in modern Scandinavian is usually connected to um, taking the Lord's name in vain,
Mhm.
really, and sort of using the name for the devil, and all the different types of names for the devil you could, really. But having said that, there's also a taboo about the body. So if you use words connected to genitalia and so on, many of these words will be seen as foul. So although we don't really see it as swearing per se, it's still somehow sort of swearing in Scandinavian, but not in the same way as in English, where the parts of the body is the absolutely the most common ways of cursing.
Hmm. I've heard it said that languages in general uh, sort of rank different things in terms of what's the worst thing to curse about.
Now,
And so you may have sexual cursing as the worst things to say. You may have religious cussing as the worst things to say. It's the case in modern Scandinavian languages, ban and
mm,
have you. And then you may have excrement cursing as the worst things to say. And I
yeah,
think you're exactly right that in modern English, it's sex related. It's either sexual body parts or the act of sex. I'm trying to
yeah,
be as euphemistic as I can here. We're inevitably going to say some of these words.
precisely. Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit difficult to touch this topic without using somehow using foul language, because well, when I disseminate about this, of course I can always use the Latin names of it, which will always somehow seem more neutral in a way.
Terms for the phallus.
Yeah, precisely. But if you really want to express it in a way that feels genuine and must have felt similar in the original language, I think the most accurate way to do that would be to also use the modern foul language. But let's try to be civil, and use as many euphemisms as we can.
Right, right. So, uh, so you mentioned being intrigued by the etymology of some of these terms. What are some terms that have intriguing etymologies that come to mind?
Oh, yes, I think one of the most interesting, it's difficult to say most interesting, but because it's all interesting. But the one that springs into mind first, for me at least, is the word food, spelled
Is it hot in
F-U.
here?
Yeah, F-U, and the D, which I can't recall the English term for it. D with
As
the extra tail on it.
yeah, as
The ed, yes. Um, it is a word that means, yeah, canis, I think is the Latin term that's most broadly,
should I
yeah,
say it?
it's a big category, really. Anything connected to the canis almost.
Yeah, should I just say it? It's it's vagina.
Yes, yeah. Which is, of course, a Latin word, so it's neutral enough.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's some discussion on what the etymology of this word really is. We don't really know. We can't trace it that far back. There are plenty of good suggestions. One of them is that it simply means foul smelling, something that smells terrible. It's one of the suggestions. I'm not sure it's completely convincing, but it is fair enough as a suggestion.
Would it be cognate with Latin buta? But I
That
don't
that is
necessarily.
that is a very good question, because the word puta itself is not entirely um, analyzed, or not convincingly, anyways.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it may well be connected to puta, but yeah, again, different or difficult etymology to really get further back into.
yeah. Okay.
But it is a word that is used in many Germanic languages, in the Germanic form "futhis," which developed into Old Norse "fud," which has still been used in Scandinavian languages today, mostly meaning ours, or but. But it's also been loaned into some English dialects. So in Northumbrian dialects in England, you have, I think it's fud or fud.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Um,
Huh.
but the most common word for vagina in Scandinavian languages today, in Swedish and Norwegian, it's fitta, fitte, which seems to be a loan from continental Germanic, which again has the same origin as food does.
Hmm.
Um, So yes, it's one of those words that's common Germanic, you could say. And you see it a lot in runic inscriptions, possibly also because the way Futh would be rendered in the younger Futhark would be the first three letters of the alphabet, the Futhark, F-U-T, or Thorn. So in some cases, it may just be the starting of a Futhark. And in other cases, very clearly, it seems to be a playing with words, you could say. In one inscription, you have the rendering of Futh Org, which, if you read it as Futh Org, it would mean something like female nymphomania.
Oh yeah, okay. Orc
yeah,
being the feminine
precisely
nominative singular of Argar. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
correct. Yeah. So yes, plenty of words for the genitalia and testicles and so on that I've looked into, and they're all quite interesting, really, because it seems to be a quite colorful palette. I don't know if you say that in English, but a vast variety of choices you could have for, using different words for the same thing, really.
A rich tapestry.
Precisely. Which is good when you write texts and when you need to use euphemisms. Of course, some euphemisms may just be euphemisms and not necessarily a word that would be commonly understood as a word for genitalia in itself, but just, handy because it's an obvious metaphor, you could say.
And you mentioned I'll use French in euphemizing this. You mentioned le coucounet masculin. Right? Isn't that a French euphemism for testicles?
I think it would be understood as such, yes.
Did I ever? Can I make a side note about that? I am so prudish sometimes about talking about these things myself, and especially in front of audiences, that I try to use euphemisms for them, right? And I used some French euphemism like that. I can't exactly remember what it was when I was doing the great courses lectures about Norse mythology and mentioning that Freyr has an upright, he's ithyphallic.
Yeah.
And that one little statue. And I used some French term like this, and they thought that it was Old Norse, and they put it on the screen over my face. Then I told them, like, please take that off of my face because someone's going to screenshot this French word for penis.
Yeah. Lovely. Yeah. See, you're touching upon something relevant now because there's such a large degree of taboo on this this whole subject, really, because some people will find it embarrassing. Particularly in the Anglophone culture, where English is the first language, you're fairly prudent about talking about sex compared to Scandinavians, at least. But still, in Scandinavian, there's taboo connected to it, and even if people have been researching the inscriptions and the texts and the words connected to this, you don't really see many researchers, at least, go public and talk loudly and wildly about these topics vividly in a very colorful and ways that make with vivid images and so on. You don't really see that. Sometimes we see it in museums where some museum hosts can be quite proud of their knowledge on the topic. But that's, it's good dissemination and makes interesting stories. But all in all, it is not a topic we see a lot of discussion about in the public, which is a shame. But I'm twisted in the way on this topic that I could just go on. I could use all the worst words and not really feel embarrassed about it. But I do have some, I don't know what you really call it, but
Restraint?
yeah, I would some kind of restraint based on how I know the receivers would take it.
Sure.
In at work we have one of the poles in the longhouse in the Land of Legend. It is sort of carvings of Freyr with his most notorious characteristic, namely the phallus.
Mm.
And sometimes I just like to give sort of details of where to find the most notorious sign of Freyr on this pole, and you can see on the faces when they realize what they're looking at. Sometimes they really blush. So yeah, it's one of those topics. Yeah.
Yeah, people say, "Oh, should I say it? Is he trying to trick me into saying it?"
Yeah.
Right. Are there any other particular etymologies you want to highlight?
I think one of the etymologies we could highlight is that in almost all the words for the copulation act itself is related to words that mean either hitting or striking, which I find interesting. Why is it striking? I mean, that to me that sounds more harsh than the act really is. But somehow that's just, that's what we see in pula, which is one of the Scandinavian words for it. Knulla, the same. It's the same with the English fuck, which may or may not have had the same meaning in Old Norse. I see very often a suggestion that the F words in English comes from Old Norse. We don't really have. Well, we can't say for sure. It may not.
Yeah, I don't see any reason that it has to. The general thought is that fuck is cognate with Latin, the pugin root, right? And like pugnacious and pugnare to hit. So you just have Grimm's law, P to F and G to K. But I don't think that you need a Scandinavian intermediary for that.
Precisely. Yeah.
And it's not surprising that it wouldn't be preserved as such in Old English or Old Norse. I don't think that word is preserved, is it?
Not that I know of, no. And that's unfortunately how it goes for most of these words, because in most texts we have from Old English and Old Norse, and even earlier than that, are texts that, well, they're about the elite, made of the elite, usually. So it's a certain segment of people who write these texts, which I find interesting in itself, because if you look at Latin graffitis in the Roman Empire, you see a lot of naughty inscriptions.
Absolutely.
We don't really see a lot of naughty inscriptions, certainly not in the Elder Futhark. Although some really juicy suggestions have been on the table through the ages, but most of them are not viewed in modern scholarly traditions, at least, as rude in that sense, or connected to fertility rites or whatnot. So it's first when we get to Viking Age, late Viking Age, and the Middle Ages, we really see the runic inscriptions that talk about screwing, really.
Is the usual verb that we see there, to my recollection, serda and its derivatives?
That's one of the words, yes. Serda and streda, which may or may not be a metathesis or when you have taboo, you sort of switch the sounds, the positioning of the sounds in a word. Sometimes we see it in wolf, really. The word for wolf compared to the Greek word lukos, you see the U and the L is flipped, which indicate that there's some sort of taboo connected to the wolf, which is maybe not as crazy. We're thinking of how the taboo of the bear has clearly also been there. We don't even have the Indo-European word for bear in Scandinavian, or Germanic for that matter.
The Arctos word.
Precisely.
Right.
Would be, if we would have it, yeah, it would be something like urd in Old Norse, or possibly urks, depending on. Yeah, see, that's deep etymology there.
I can see a lot about
But
this.
yeah, that's also one of the things. That's one of the taboos. So if we're talking about swearing, words that are in somehow connections to various types of taboos could be used as cursing. So calling someone a wolf or a bear may have been, in some cases, swearing. So if you want to really say something mean, oh, you bear, or you wolf, or something like that.
Perhaps, do you think that has a sense of either evoking harm from that animal upon the person? Or perhaps associating that person with the most harmful kind of animal? Something that might also be happening with Vargar i Veum?
Yeah, I think that would be reasonable, because the word varg, which is in standard Swedish, it's the most common word for the wolf. It really means to strangle. And etymologically, you can see it go way, way back into European languages, all the way to, Anatolian languages also use derivations of the ground theme of this word, which indicates that there's something connected to taboo about strangling as a suffocation, as means of execution for some sort of crimes. And then being a varg in the Veum, so a wolf in the most holy sanctuary, meaning you would be a killer, really, in the most holy sanctuary, which would be a very clear taboo, which you would be punished for. So there's that. Yeah, one type of taboo could be that, and we don't really know whether the Old Norse people would have a very strict religious swearing as we do in modern Scandinavian. It's conceivable, but we don't know. There is a TV series called The Beforeigners. Excellent TV series, in my opinion. It's a setup where you have people from 3 different eras in the past come back to modern days in Oslo. So we would have people from the Stone Age, people from the late Viking Age, and people from the 1800s. And one of the things they really did in this series was they created a Stone Age language, and they also needed to figure out how Norse people would speak and what kind of swearing would they use. I think one of the suggestions were that Fyri Helju, so invoking the goddess of the underworld. And another one would be Jotnarred, so Jotun's penis or Jotun's testicle, which is, I quite liked the hypothetic words that were suggested, but we don't really know.
And that's Alexander Lycke, who worked on the Old Norse in that, I believe. We interviewed him actually on this channel about the Old Norse for Beforeigners. And I was just thinking, we do have some cursing-like phrases like that. I mean, in Grimnismal, in the prose note that precedes Grimnismal in Koningsbok, there's "May the something take you," some word for Jotuns or something. go where they will take you or something like that, which I think occurs somewhere else that's just scratching at the back of my mind. So I guess that's a kind of cursing. May the evil beings take you, right?
Yeah. And it would make complete sense that you would have some evil deity do something to you, be used as an insult or swearing. Yeah, makes sense. You also see it in, I think, the Tryggevelle runic stone in Tryggevelle, where the whole ending phrase is somewhat difficult to interpret because we can't really know for sure two of the words what they mean. But one of the words it's written R-I-T-I, I think, Riti, Rita, which is usually interpreted as connected to the word red, so to scare or be scared. So a being that makes people scared. The rete in, or the rede in modern Danish is a word for a scarecrow.
Hmm.
And one of the suggestions is that this kind of scarecrow is a relic, really, linguistic relic of something that has been a scare somehow. So may the one who destroyed these stones be rete or rede.
Almost a frightener.
Yeah, the frightener, or the one who is afraid, or yeah.
Oh, sure, sure, sure. Yeah, always hard to know with those like in stem nouns if they're like agentive
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, and then another thought that crosses my mind before I suppose we should proceed more to some of the questions that were piled on here.
Yeah.
Is how do we know when we look at even an instance of apparent cursing in something like I was just thinking the prose note in Grimnismal that it's not ad hoc, because
Yeah.
some things can be ad hoc cursing. I mean, I can make up an ad hoc curse in English right now. I can say "get fucked by the devil," and you understand that I'm like I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that, but you
Yeah.
understand it's a really negative thing for me to say to somebody. And I think
Yeah.
that's effectively what that prose note is saying in Grimnismal.
Yeah.
Um, who knows if that's ad hoc or if that's something that just everybody says, right?
Yeah. Precisely. It is very difficult to know with the limited amount of texts we have, and also because as we mentioned earlier, it is usually a very civilized tone in the saga material,
Right.
with one very notorious exception.
Do you want to mention what that is since you
The Bosa saga of Haralds is a one of the legendary saga for Fornaldar Sogur, which is incredibly rowdy. And they use a lot of euphemisms, but you are in no doubt what they're talking about when they use these euphemisms. It is about, can I take my foal to your pond to have a drink? And oh yes, please let it drink. And it's really thirsty, this foal of yours. And so it just goes on and on a lot. Very, very entertaining.
can you explain
Very,
what that's meant to say? I don't understand, but
yeah, okay, yeah. It's really about this main character Busi, who goes around, travels a lot, and in several occasions visits a farmer who has a daughter, and he gets to sleep in the chamber of this daughter, and they get it on. Yes.
I understood the implication.
Yeah.
Uh, whew. Yeah, and some of the folks in here are in a Old Norse reading group made up of a bunch of my patron supporters who are reading Bosa Saga Keros right now, and
Mhm.
several of them asked about this word danganda that occurs
Yes.
there.
Yeah. Dangan, it is a strange word. Someone mentioned that it may be a hapax also a word that only occurs once in the entire corpus of the texts of this language. I think that's the case. Yes, I haven't seen it elsewhere, but my mind is not fixed in the way that I would remember all the examples of the word if I saw it more than once. But to my knowledge, it's only this one place. And you could easily interpret this word again as a ablaut degree of the word we have in dengya, which means to beat, to strike. Again. So dangandi would be could compare it to an ing, a verb ending with ing, the banging.
So, and there we have that striking metaphor again.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So that's what Buse says is, well, he gets a lot of information from this young woman, daughter of this farmer, and he thanks her for the information, and in amusement salary, I think the term is best translated to, he gave her a good banging, really. Yeah.
Okay, right.
And it follows up with, it went well for both of them. And then they slept until the broad daylight. So clearly, it's not just a lot of dudes slapping their knees, because that's clearly the kind of situation that this saga was written or at least made under, but also mention that both of them it went well for both.
She's lighting a cigarette. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Whew.
Yes.
But very understandable, very believable as a euphemism, right? I mean, what is it? Because it's not just Germanic languages about these strike-based metaphors for the act, right? You're right. I mean, it doesn't seem like a natural description of the act, which, I mean, I'm a virgin who's never seen a naked person, but I don't understand that it's much like combat.
No, certainly not. I'm sure you can have some very specific types of what you could say genres of copulation that would perhaps be, but in my understanding of the thing, and I can only speak of my own experience, but no, it's not very violent. No.
Well, no, that's also my experience of it is not violent. So. So what? Oh yeah, questions. We should get to questions. I'm being reminded to get to questions. All right. So, I think that we're kind of getting through some of these anyway, but just to make sure that we're touching on what people asked. Cole asked, were there any types of insults that we would not see as insulting today? For example, insults based on appearance, sexuality, status, manliness are common today. Are there topics of insults that would be unexpected or not seen as insulting today?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, because probably yes, or at least quite possible, but I'm not sure I have any good example. The best example would then be the Rita in the Sørgevelde stone and the Glavendrup stone as well, almost the exact same formulation. That would come off as odd. You scarecrow. I mean, sure, it's an insult, but would you be so offended by it? Perhaps not. You could see it as a slur, maybe, for someone who's not great looking, but still.
Maybe. Yeah.
But again, it is super difficult to really know what the most common ways of insulting and swearing and cursing would be in the Old Norse language, because we have so few sources, and the sources that we have are quite specific. But in all likelihood, the answer is yes.
Sure. And even things that we don't realize looking at text today are meant to be insults.
Exactly.
Beardhoven asked, do you have some expanded context or etymology of the word auditor, considering it seems to be such a bad insult back then?
Yes, arger or rager. Again, you in Old Norse you both have arger and rager, which is the switching of sounds. You see the same in ars and ras, for the word for ass. It is a word that again seems to, talking about arger, again has deep etymological history in the Indo-European languages. Again, you can, or at least there are suggestions to compare it to Anatolian languages, which is the branch of Indo-Europeans that broke off first. So it's way back in time. And it seems to simply means something like to cover, either to cover or be on top of in a sexual way. And of course, in Old Norse, it's for the most part, at least, seen as the active part of a sexual relation, mostly between men. So the one who's on top really is sort of the theme of the thing. But interestingly, it's the one on the receiving end that is the arg one. So it seems not to be any sort of taboo about being the one who performs this stuff. It's the receiver who is argr, unless you're a woman. Because if you're arg, then you're really a nymphomaniac, someone who desires sex, something so unnatural as desiring. Yeah, it's a very odd way of looking at it, really. But yeah,
well, maybe not so odd. I mean, I'll insert a personal note here. You know, I was raised half Baptist, and I was raised to believe women did not want that, right? So, I mean, there is a traditional culture into modern times that says, you know, women are not supposed to want this.
Yeah, sure.
And you see it in Thrimskvida, right? Freya says, I won't go to Jotunheimar to marry Thrimmer. Everybody would say that I can't remember the exact, I don't think she says Arger, but she says like man lusting or something, right? You know, she doesn't want people to think that Verkjarn, Ranvig says right there, like yearning for men, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That is very interesting, coming from Freya as well. Super interesting. But yes, absolutely. And you could also see it in, if you just view the Norse people as Indo-European people with their patriarchy being super important, then that would be, at least as an ideal, would be something that would hold on to.
Right, that it's not decorous, right? Yeah, but at any rate, that the insult here is yearning to be on the receiving end of this act, not making any kind of implication about being on the doing end of it, right? Yeah, but about being on the receiving end of it, of whichever gender. Yeah. Yeah, which actually reminds me quite a bit of similar insults in Greek culture, where there's nothing at all against the active act, no matter who the recipient of it is. But there's a serious implication about being on the receiving end of it. Blake asked a bunch of questions. He asked about Sertha and if it connotes ordinary fornications. He says it seems to be used in some inscriptions that might just refer to some extramarital or premarital ordinary activities. On the other hand, I've seen it has connotations of sodomy in some sources, but it's used in inscriptions between men and women, e.g., Smither, Sarth, VDC. So you can see where the question's going.
there's a discussion on this, and some people like to see it as a sort of what would you call it? You would say a molestation, maybe
Hmm.
someone who, rape really.
Hmm.
So unless it's just sodomy, if it's heterosexual serding, then they view it as something that is a rape. As you say, on non-normal copulation, really. But in my opinion, it doesn't have to be. Sure, this that is a possibility, but I don't really see the arguments as better for this type of interpretation compared to just people. Yeah, a word for having sex, really.
Hmm.
A word for shagging. And there are some interesting inscriptions on this, like Smider Sard Vigdis of Snellabeinum. This dude shagged this woman of a notorious family, it seems, because he he calls her from the family name.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but also the inscription where Vigdis Sard and Helgi reist. So Vigdis did the serding,
Hmm.
and Helgi reist, well, he wrote the runes, which is an interesting statement, really, because what does it mean that Vigdis Sard if it is about, well, you could say it's a non-married sex then, yeah.
Hmm.
But it could just be Vigdis had sex with someone. And it may be Helge, it may be someone else. Helge may just be sneak peeking
Sure.
into the.
Sure.
Yeah,
It strikes me as being similar in Forced to English fuck, that it could just be a disfavored, nasty way of talking about the act, no matter who is doing it. Like, I saw them thing to use the hand gesture from while you were sleeping. Uh, but uh, that it could also be used for, the act, so and so fucked so and so, and that could be bad, right? But it could also
yeah,
just be, oh, like I happened to see them, with their clothes off together. Um, it strikes me as just being like the nasty way of talking about something, and it could imply the act itself is nasty, or the act itself is sort of ordinary but like hidden.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Strikes
Possible.
me. Um, it's also used as a adjective in the past participle, isn't it? Strawthen.
Stråden, yeah.
Yeah.
Stråden i rassen. Yeah. First time the cross church in Oslo mentioned, actually.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, interestingly enough, someone's being shagged in the arse in the inscription mentioning it. Yeah.
Hmm.
But yes, it's one example of how a man is being performed arg on,
Hmm. Hmm.
or ergi on, rather. Yeah,
And RIS is, I don't remember which inscriptions might be. One of them is in a tomb. Is that right?
precisely. Yeah, the I can't recall which tomb. It's one of the tombs on an island in the British Isles. And the other one, the one with Oli, is Oskøynteren Stråden i Rassen. It's in Oslo, yeah. Runic stick.
Well, speaking of which, Rambai had a bunch of questions emailed in beforehand. She had asked if you had, because a bunch of them are reading Bosa Saga. She asked if you had any other crazy romantasy saga recommendations.
Ooh.
What I would call lizardy books.
Well, nothing compared to Bosa Saga. It is just something else. But there are some sagas mentioning interesting Yeah, interesting parts of connected to the marital bed. And I think Njal Saga, Brennu Njal Saga is one of them, where I think it's Ruter who is married to,
Oh,
can't
he's
recall.
cursed by Queen
Yes,
Gunhildur, right?
precisely.
Hmm.
And that in the whole story is super interesting because he refuses to go to bed with Queen Gunhild, which of course makes her somehow ergi because she desires, uh, yeah, desires this man who is not her husband. But yeah, he curses her, and interestingly, the way the curse works, it seems, is that his penis will get too large for them to be able to copulate, which is certainly not uh, how modern fiction would work, I think.
Oh, no,
Having too big a dick is usually not the problem. Of
that's right. Yeah, her curse is
course,
because he says he won't sleep with her, and she says, "You have a woman back in Iceland," and he says, "No." And she's like, "I think you do," and so my curse is, yeah, that your penis will be too big to have sex.
yeah. And that's yeah, it's an interesting little story within the story, you could say. Also because it reveals how how it works when someone wants to get divorced and what kind of rights do you have, and that she actually could file for divorce at the thing because they were not able to have ordinary marriage. I
Mhm.
think it's the yeah. I think that's the way we should translate it. I can't recall exactly the wording, "husgaparfar" or something.
Mhm. I
Um,
think you're right,
yeah.
and
Uh,
which is
so
fascinating against a background where that's also considered something that it's a little bit prurient for women to want.
yeah, exactly. But when it's within the marriage, that's somehow required, and it's
Mhm.
required that I can't recall if the wording is so that it means that you well need to understand from the wording whether it means that she needs to have an orgasm within this. Um, I can't recall. I think first time I read it, that's how I read it.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
Am I crazy in recollecting that the Old Testament has a provision something like this too?
That would be super interesting.
It might not be in the Old Testament. It might be in something later like the Talmud, but I want to say that somewhere in ancient or medieval Jewish tradition, there's a similar provision about marriage, that the woman needs to be sexually satisfied.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense if there were such a law made by God.
Anyway, all right. Rabbi also asked, naturally, having some curiosity about this, there are three inscriptions from Bergen with the name Ranvai in them, one of which is pretty dirty. They're in B628, in B431, and in B439. Do you think they're all about the same person?
Difficult to say. I can't recall the exact dating of all the inscriptions of the Bryggen inscriptions. Uh, One could simply just assume that, like today, Ranveig was a fairly common name.
Mhm.
Um, that's one way. It could be a name running in one family, which, if you have during the or under the right circumstances, you could have a family with a lot of Ranvegs in many generations, depending on the tradition of the naming and so on.
Hmm.
But it's also possible, of course, that at least two of them do mention the same person. But I don't want to conclude on this.
Sure. And I think we touched on this, but I think it's worth just making sure that we do. She also asked, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the oldest food inscriptions. Is that likely to refer to genitalia already in Proto-Norse? Mentioning, she
Yeah.
recalls correctly, Sporklon didn't think so.
Yeah, he didn't think so, and he also uh, didn't survive long enough to read the absolutely oldest food inscription, which is the one from Svingerud Hole, where it clearly says F.U. Thorn, which is so early that it can't possibly. We would expect an I ending or even I Z ending in that case. So I think that's highly unlikely to refer to
How old
the
is it?
It is between 50 BC and 275 AD,
Okay.
somewhere in that range. So it's fairly large or broad dating, you could say, but it's quite early
Hmm.
and way too early to have lost or yeah all the ending parts.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mm.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Unless it's what? Vocative, but even then, I guess the vocative would have an ending.
Yeah, okay, that's a suggestion.
Like,
It would be odd, but it wouldn't be
I
the
don't
only
know.
odd thing in the world.
A man might talk to a vagina. That doesn't strike me as completely like you know, oh vagina, right?
Yeah,
That's like
yeah,
actually that's probably a line in Aristophanes.
yeah.
Uh,
Judging from the rest of this slab and the other inscription connected to it, I think not.
yeah,
I think it's
okay,
highly unlikely.
but I
Yeah,
had to mention it.
yeah, no, but it's fair enough.
I mean, if it's, I guess if the Proto-Norse vocative is like the Gothic vocative, it would be endingless, but maybe not.
Yeah, uh, it, it would be, I think, but we also are somewhat unresolved on the question whether ancient Nordic had vocative at
Sure,
all.
sure.
Yeah,
And I don't
but
want to donk at this point home too hard. I just, uh, all right. Johan Petter asked, we know the Norse were in contact with other people, so while it may be difficult, do we know if they exchanged cuss words with other cultures? That is to say, Norse words borrowed in other languages or vice versa. Mentioning also that it's been hypothesized that fuck is a Norse word borrowed into English.
yeah, yeah. As I mentioned, food is has traces in Cumbrian dialects, Northumbrian dialects. So yeah, that's at least one way that they traveled, and I'm also sure that in contact with other people, social linguistics has always been there. We just haven't called it social linguistics. So it's 2,000 years ago when Nordic people went to the Roman Empire, if they meddled a lot with Romans or meddled a lot with Celtic people or Baltic people or Finno-Ugric speaking people, could be Sami people, Finns, what have you.
Hmm.
When you have language contact, one of the first things you learn is, yeah, their naughty language, really.
That's true. I would say that among the top three words of Spanish most Americans know is usually chinga. Um, but but also it occurs to me that doesn't Scarpethan use a French word for whore on um, Hallgerther? I
That
think
is very possible.
I think he calls her puta or pute,
Yeah.
right? Like either the Latin or the French term. Am I crazy? Hold on, I can probably check
That
this.
that's not crazy, no. Um,
Um, I'm gonna look for this.
yeah, just
In the meantime, Jackson, different Jackson, said, use of profanity as a means to condemn someone socially and publicly doesn't seem to be uncommon in the sagas, but are there other preserved profane use cases? I once watched a Steven Pinker talk where he made the point that people often use profanity to establish a social bond with their audience, to establish playful informality. Because we're
Yeah.
all cool here and comfortable with each other, I can swear.
Well, we're touching on the a more uh, cognitive cognitive linguistics. Why do we swear? Why do we have the need for cursing? One of them is, as you mentioned, insults. Another one, as Pinker mentioned, to feel like you're in group in a way. And another way is to emphasize something as terribly good. I mean, terrible is not a good word, but if you put it in front of good, it means very good.
Right. Or fucking
Um,
awesome.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So in a way of emphasizing, and you could use all sorts of words that they're not necessarily swearing, but if you analyze it, it seems a bit odd. I can think of one runic inscription that says that the dead person is hardan godan dreng,
Mhm.
so hard, good boy, really, a good man. What it means. So yes, it's about what types of functions do we swear under,
Mhm.
and I'm sure it would have been exactly the same in the Norse language as it is in all other cultures, really. So you could, yeah, just take that as a basis and then more or less just imagine yourself into what kinds of words would you put together in a way that would make sense to us as emphasizing or as slurs or as naughty words. But when it comes to sources, yeah, again, we're a bit short on sources.
Mhm. And I mean, just thinking of, again, I guess sort of the social linguistics, psycholinguistics of it, it's interesting how arbitrary the words that can be used in that sort of reverse good way can be, because we can say fucking good, but we don't say like fucking good, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like it's sort of arbitrary which ones can be flipped that way. I
yeah,
th by the way, okay, I looked it up. I looked up Njálsaga on Snerpa and I found it. Skarphéðinn says, Ekki munu mega orðin því að þú ert annaðhvort hornkettling eða púta. So
yeah.
he's,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
you're a
yeah,
horn old woman, a horn like a
yeah,
almost horny, but it doesn't mean the same thing in Old Norse. Like you're a horned old woman or you're a whore, but it's like the French or Latin word for whore.
yeah.
So that's interesting.
So question was answered then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Jackson also asked, other Jackson, oh, pretty much exactly what we just talked about. Do we see profanity as a positive modifier, like Gunnar was a badass motherfucker kind of thing? Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Andrea asked, it would be nice to have some mild insults I can use with other people. Nothing too mean, but something colorful, useful for recalcitrant inanimate objects, for example. Anything you would suggest?
yeah. I mean, let your imagination go wild. Use the dictionary and pick your choices, or look through the texts and see. Oh, that would work well as a slur or a mild taunting word or something like that. Yeah. Do I have good examples? Uh, I could go on for ages on this, I think.
Well, go ahead. I mean, like, give us some.
Uh, well, you could use some word connected to taboo or shame. The word skam, in example,
Hmm.
which means shame. Some Norwegian dialects, my own in particular, use that as a modifier a lot. So put it on the start of the adjective, shamely good or skamgot, shame good, stuff like that. And yeah, as I said, let your imagination go wild here. Plenty of possibilities, and it's all hypothetical, of course. If you create something on your own, it's yeah, modern constructions, you could say.
Yeah. Scott, what region are you from? You're from somewhere in the West, aren't you?
Stavanger, yeah.
Oh, Stavanger. Okay.
Mm.
Um, I think if just to throw out another suggestion there, I've always found that in English you can do some pretty colorful cursing just using the names of weird birds.
Okay.
Call somebody a dick sissel or a woodcock.
Yeah, sure.
There's
Yeah,
not quite as many opportunities for that in Old Norse, but maybe you could call somebody a krea, an Arctic tern, or
yeah,
something like that,
yeah.
or a
Sure.
e-raven, a rebna. I don't know.
Yeah,
Just throwing
you
something out there.
Ravnakettling or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, why not? Barons had asked about Skralinger maybe being like by implication like a negative term. We don't really know what it means.
Yeah, no, it's one of those words that you just have to guess, really. All the suggestions are equally good because, well, provided they make sense, uh, sound historically. So if they're formally okay, well, then the suggestion is, feasible because we can't really prove or unprove anything when it comes to this word.
Hmm.
Um, um, yeah, in early modern Scandinavian, the word Finn or Finnish people and Sami people were also used as, well, mildly negative, in some cases absolutely negative. But
Hmm.
that's, I think, more to do with where the society was at this point. Um,
And it also couldn't have been entirely negative because it occurs in so many names, right? People name
yes,
Finner.
that's also precisely. And coming back to the wolf and the bear, I mean, they're quite uh, present in the onomasticon, as we call it, so
Mhm.
the personal names. So one taboo doesn't necessarily mean that the taboo is connected to all parts of society and all
Right.
social situations. Same as you have with religious swearing. Religion or calling the name of God is, of course, completely fine if it's connected to somehow a religious situation. But if it's not connected to the religious situation, if you just shout out the name of God when you hit your leg or whatever, it
Mhm.
is viewed as profanity. Not to say you would have the exact same thing in the Old Norse or Germanic attitude towards wolves or bears, but yeah. Uh,
That's a good analogy. Uh,
mm,
an analogy I've used too is rattlesnake. If I call someone a rattlesnake, I don't mean something good by it, but and I think that's typically true. Like calling someone a rattlesnake is like it's very low down, right? But you
yeah,
but a lot of the same people who grew up in the same culture as I do use rattlesnake as an insult, fly that do not tread on me flag, and they're identifying with the rattlesnake then, right? Like I'm tough like a rattlesnake. If you step on me, I'll bite you.
all right.
Don't call me a rattlesnake, but I can like, but I'm like one in the sense that
Yeah,
like I'm fierce to my enemy. Yeah, I think it's a similar thing with wolves. Like I'm like a wolf to my enemies, but don't call me a
yeah,
predatory. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy as well.
So we've gone for about an hour, taking about an hour of your time. I want to be sensitive with your time. If you need to go soon, let me
Yeah,
know.
yeah, it's fine for at least a few more minutes.
Okay. I think we've hit most of the questions and many other questions that were asked kind of got addressed as we went through those. Are there other things you'd like, some favorite examples or words you'd just like to mention that didn't get mentioned?
Um, see that. I could, of course, just go on talking about genitalia, but perhaps to sum up the
Hmm.
whole thing, I could point out the one of the Oldenburg runic inscriptions, which says, it seems, Kukr Kus Kuntu, which possibly could be translated to cock, kiss the cunt,
Hmm.
which I think is a fabulous inscription. It's straight to the point.
Yes.
Um, and I can't recall if it's this. No, it must be another. There's another quite naughty inscription made on a little half rooted, or half like a root, a stick with half a root on it, which in a way looks like a dick. I think it just says kukr or something, which just emphasized the words, really.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, if you, and how modern seeming is that, right? Someone spots a rock or a stick that looks like this and just writes the word on it. It seems very relatably simple in a way.
yeah, you have a lot of that with runic inscription. A jar, yeah, let's write jar. A stool, yeah, let's write skamella on it. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
kuk, kiss, kuntu, yeah, very. It's one of my favorite runic inscriptions. Has two genitalia, and even the word kiss is interesting, because what does it mean? What can we deduce from this? How does a cock kiss a cunt, really? Is it tongue kissing? Well, clearly. Yeah, see, yeah, we could go on.
Yeah. Or is it just, is it metonymy? Is it the man kiss the woman? Yeah. What is the catalog number of this one? Do you remember?
Let's see. I
Need
think,
to, I need to find this. Need to look it up in rune data.
yeah.
Need to make it like
The,
a
the
Zoom.
signum is X space STOL4.
Excellent. Okay. Now anyone who wants to look that up can. Well, Krister, I really, really appreciate your time and answering our questions and in presenting about a really colorful and interesting subject. And I think, um, I mean, this is it's a lot of food for thought too about the sort of meta linguistics of cursing.
Yeah, super relevant question, has always been relevant, and will continue to be so. And the more we look into it, maybe we can find some new interesting passages in sagas and law texts, even, that could be, yeah, perhaps considered as swearing, or at least colorful language. Um, and of course, the etymology behind all the words we use for all the juicy parts of the body. It's always interesting. Why do we even call it like that?
Yeah.
Why is the word for, yeah, like kukr, why is it we call something swelling? It makes sense, of course. The dick it's somehow swelling, but um, yeah, I think we could go on for quite a bit.
Good. Good. And I thank you for how much you have gone on. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. I'll look forward to having you on again. And stay in touch and see you soon.
Yes, good. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Tucson Talk and everyone out there from beautiful Colorado. It really is right now.
It really is. Looks good. Yeah.
Thank you. Wishing you all the best.
Good luck.